Hey everybody, this is Mr. Sheridan. It is October 8th, and this is Natural Resources. First of all, our second FFA meeting is tonight at 7 o'clock in the middle school commons. You should come in through the middle school door that is by Mrs. Hodson's office, by the superintendent's office, and we'll let you in over there. We are going to have pizza, so we will be able to feed everybody. So come on in a little bit before 7. We'll try to eat before we get really up and running, and we'll try to get as many people as we can because we are doing officer elections tonight. So you will be deciding who is going to be the leaders of our organization through at least for the next 6 to 7 months until we get to the end of the year, and we'll elect a new officer team late in the spring. So I hope that you all can make it for that. For now, what I really want to do today is over the last couple of weeks, we've done a lot of these CK12 assignments, and it's a lot of reading, and it's a lot of quizzes, and it's a lot of stuff. So what I wanted to do today is run through the vocabulary that we've done. Now, I'm going to warn you that this is a little bit long. It's a couple pages long. I'm going to try to go through this. I'm going to try to make it interesting, but we need to understand this stuff. And some of these words are a little tricky, but a lot of this stuff is background knowledge that we're going to need when we start talking about crop and soil science, when we start talking about the corn and soybeans that are coming out of the fields here shortly. We need to know some of this background about how plants reproduce, how they flower, and that sort of thing. So we're going to run through these quickly. This is available for all of you. I just posted this. I put all the vocabulary. It's all there. It's all filled out. It's ready to go. All you need to do is be there and read it so that you understand all this stuff. It's right here in your week 8 section of your Google Classroom. So let's run through it really quickly, and we will also we'll jump back and forth in between CK12 so that you can kind of see where most of this information came from. So eukaryotic organisms, we're talking about multi-celled organisms. Prokaryotes would be one-celled organisms, bacteria, that sort of thing. Eukaryotes are animals that are multicellular, that have a nucleus and have DNA and membrane-bound organelles. So when we talk about, I've got these things hanging in my class, that right there is a plant cell. It's got all those organelles in it, and we'll talk more about those as we move through plant soil science. But that is what a eukaryotic organism is. Photosynthesis. We are covering this in 7th grade science. You all have gone through this before. You all should know what photosynthesis is. Photosynthesis is the process of taking sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water and turning it into glucose and oxygen. So glucose is the energy, it's the food, it's what we need to grow. It's what plants need to grow, and then herbivores eat the plants, we eat the herbivores, and on and on and on. Food chains and ecosystem stuff that you've all covered in middle school as well. But photosynthesis is the process of plants making their own food. Plants can be called producers and autotrophs. Autotroph meaning that they make their own stuff versus a heterotroph, which would mean that they need to get it from someplace else, that they're getting their energy from another food source. Autotrophs, they can make it all themselves. So so autotrophs is another word for plants. Producers, autotrophs, both plants. Diploid and haploid cells. These are the two different types of cells. Diploid cells have 2 separate types of chromosomes. That's going to be most of the cells in our bodies, most of the cells in plant bodies. Haploid cells are very important, though they contain 1 set of chromosomes. That would be a type of cell that is a reproductive cell that is being used to combine that chromosome, that 1 chromosome that it has. Remember, it's called a haploid because it only has 1. It's combining that with another haploid cell to make 2, to make a diploid cell, so that you've got a full set of complete chromosomes. Alternation of generations. Let's go back to CK12 really quick and where we talked about the alternation of generations. So right here, we're talking about the difference between saurophytes and gametophytes. We're going to define those here in just a minute. But this process goes through really quickly here, and I laid this out in your vocabulary sheet. So this is the summary. It's the exact same thing, copied and pasted from this right here. And this is how I want you to use this vocabulary sheet. There's a big difference between copying and pasting something into a summative or even a formative assessment and copying and pasting something into a vocabulary sheet that you are using to study from. That is perfectly fine. That's how, because this document is meant for you to study from. So you can take this stuff and you can highlight these sentences, you can copy and paste them right into your vocab. So that's what I did, and I made some adjustments here. But the summary of alternation of generations. So the haploid gametophyte, okay? So we're talking about gametophyte. So these are, we're switching in between haploid cells, which have 2 chromosomes, diploid cells, which have 2 chromosomes, and haploid cells, which only have 1. So our haploid, which is a sexual reproduction cell, okay? So we're talking about sperm and eggs. So this haploid gametophyte is producing the sperm and eggs through mitosis, which means that they can do it by themselves. They don't need another cell to do that, to reproduce. They can do it by themselves. So then the sperm and the egg combine, which creates this sporophyte, which means you have 2 sets of chromosomes now. That's what we just talked about. And it goes back and forth. So basically you're talking about it's producing, so we're going to talk about down here where we are producing, we all know what pollen is. Here we go. So in the flower, so if we're talking about flowers, this is one example of how plants reproduce. This is what we're talking about. So you've got your, let me make sure I figure out. So your stamen, which is producing pollen, which are the sperm cells of a plant. And then you have the female part of the flower, which is your carpel. And so that whole process that we're going to talk about here in a second is just talking about going back, the summary of alternation of generation. So you're going back and forth between a plant producing female and male cells and producing cells that don't reproduce, that are just that can grow on their own. Non-vascular plants are different from algae when we're these are very simple plants. These are things like mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. They don't have vascular tissue, so they can't grow very much. Seedless vascular plants, so this is ferns. This is our ferns. They have lots of, their leaves are separated and they've got lots of different stuff, but this is your example of ferns. They have vascular tissue, which allows them to grow small. We're also talking about the evolution of plants as they came into the world, and organisms became more complicated as they evolved. We went from non-vascular plants, then we started to see vascular plants that did not have seeds like ferns. Then we have gymnosperms, which do have seeds, but they don't have flowers. So these are, gymnosperms are our coniferous trees. So things that have cones, and pine trees and firs and all that good stuff. So you'll see that this gymno from gymnosperm actually means naked in Greek, meaning that the seeds aren't protected by that flower. So then we get into angiosperms, which is what we just got done reading here earlier this week. These are the ones that have vascular tissue and seeds and flowers. They are the most complicated plants, and they are everything from roses to tulips to tomatoes to corn plants to all those other things that have flowers of any kind and have seeds. They are going to be angiosperms. Now we're going to get into these seedless vascular plants, and we are going to, we're going to talk about non-vascular plants here. So look, I lied. We're back to seedless vascular plants. So the ferns are going to be in here, but some examples that we talked about were club mosses, ferns, and horsetails, You can go back and you can find those in here and go and look at we skipped non-vascular plants. We went right to vascular plants, and we talked about club mosses, ferns, and horsetails. You can see those definitions. They're all written in your vocabulary here. Then we move into seeds. So we've got, so when I was making this, the definition of a seed that they use is when we're talking about seed dispersal, the definition they use was a plant ovule containing an embryo, which is great unless you don't know what an ovule is. So when we go down and further down here, we did define ovule later. which is the part of the ovary that is the female gametophyte, and that after fertilization becomes the seed. So this is the female part of the plant that after fertilization, that's the seed. So that's what we're talking about. An ovule is before it's fertilized. After it's fertilized, it actually becomes the seed of the plant. Dormant means it's in a resting state. Dispersed means that it's scattered in several directions. If you want to go back here and talk about how seeds are dispersed, there's a ton of different ways, whether it's animals or wind or water or all kinds of stuff. There's 100 different ways that seeds are dispersed throughout nature. So these little whirligig things that maple trees have, those are also another way of seed dispersal. Conifers. So now we're talking about, if we go back up to here, we are into our gymnosperms. Okay, so now we're talking about conifers, which is our pines, firs, and cedar trees. There's also a couple other types of gymnosperms that have, so again, that means that gymno part of that means naked. So the seed is naked. So we have these other types. Honestly, that was one of our vocab words. I couldn't even find a good definition. They kept giving some examples. Basically, there's about 70 different types of species that are small. They grow in weird places. They look really weird. They aren't very common. We don't even need to worry about it. Then we get into talking about our really, really good diagram of a flower in our angiosperm deal here. So it does a good job of defining all these here. I've actually copied and pasted those and put them in your vocabulary sheet. And it does a really nice job in this diagram of showing exactly where all of these parts are. So as we go through this, you're talking about your sepals are the part around this part down here below the flower, but outside of the actual flower itself. The calyx, I believe is how that's pronounced, is all of these sepals together. So this is the calyx. If you add so one of these would be a septal, all of them together are the calyx. Then you get the corolla. So this is all the flower. This is all the petals of a flower. And keep in mind that not all flowers look like this tulip. I mean, there are lots of different types of flowers. All angiosperms have some type of flower. It just depends on how that species has evolved to figure out exactly what those are. So, yeah, we talked about the corolla now. Our stamens, okay. The part of the flower that produces pollen is our stamen. You can see in this very simple flower, everything's just kind of right here for us to see. So all of this part is called our stamen. And so this whole part is the male part of the flower. It's what produces pollen. There's a couple of different parts here. You need to know that the filament is the part that holds it up. And then when you get this whole other part, this is all called the anther, which is the male part that produces pollen. So we've got the stamen. So the filament holds up the anther, and that is the structure that actually creates pollen. That's all part of the stamen. Then the last couple here, you've got the carpel is altogether the female part of the flower, which includes these three words, which we're going to define here. The stigma is the part of the carpel where the pollen must land in order for fertilization to occur. So if you think about a corn plant, where does the actual, so in a corn plant, this section, the stamen is actually on the top of the plant. It's what the tassel is. That's what actually produces the pollen. This down here is on the ear of the corn, and that's where our, and this part here, this is basically this is the female part of our corn plant too, or whatever plant, that is called, why am I missing the female part that we just went over, the carpel. So this is all part of the carpel. So if you think about a corn plant, that's going to be the actual ear of corn that needs to be fertilized by the parts of the stamen. Okay, so then we go through the style. That's the tube that makes up the part of the carpel. So basically the stigma is the top. It has to pass through the style down to get to the ovary and to the ovule so that fertilization can occur. Now we get into some really cool stuff. I hope that you all took the time over the last couple of days to read these articles, because these Plant hormones articles are, you can literally see it. You can look outside and see this stuff happening. So hormones, plants have hormones just like we do. They are chemical messengers that are molecules that send messages to the plant that tell them to do something, whether they need to change colors because it's getting to be fall time, whether it's they need to drop their fruit so that they can spread their seed, whatever it is. There's a few really good examples down here. And I told you that you didn't need to actually define these, which is fine, but I want to go through a couple of these because they're really important and actually they're really cool. So this is ethylene. This is the first one. Basically, it's what turns fruit different colors. So you've got green tomatoes that turn into red tomatoes on the vine, right? That is because ethylene is actually a gas that goes through the air that transmits to plants that tells them that it's time for their tomatoes to turn red. So actually, if you'll look at this, there's a couple really cool stories down in here that talks about the reason that your group of fruit will go bad sooner is because once there's more of that ethylene in the air, it causes all of them to go bad. So I know in our house, strawberries don't seem to last very long. That we'll get a basket of strawberries, and it seems like as soon as one starts to get a little bit moldy, all of them get bad. So, but the same is true, and it's all because of this hormone called ethylene. It also says that that farmers will actually pick their tomatoes, those big, nice, beautiful red tomatoes that you see in the store. They actually pick those when they're green, and then they'll actually spray them with ethylene, because you can actually buy ethylene and spray that on those. So they can pick them when they're green, so they're tougher and they won't bruise as easily. Then they can get them to the store or somewhere in transit, and they'll actually spray them then when they're more secure and they won't get jostled around so much. Super cool stuff. So a couple other ones. This is the hormone that actually causes plants to grow. They've been able to do some experiments and pick that one out. Cotokinins are that actually cause cells to divide, so they can actually get them to continue to, they can actually fight the aging process in plants because they can keep those cells reproducing. And then this is another cool one. This is what they thought actually caused, plants to drop their leaves and stuff, but turns out that was ethylene. So this is a different one that does some things just a little bit differently. So some really cool stuff there with plant hormones. We should have covered everything that we had to, just hormones there. And then our final assignment was this tropisms article, which talks about how plants can respond to different stimuli in their environment, meaning that you all seen trees that have been able to lean one way so that they can get to the sun, or they grow faster so that they can get to the sun, or they can grow around something, or like in this picture right here, if you have some plants that have the ability to lean one way or somehow get more sun, that's exactly what they're going to do. When they're responding to sun, it's called phototropism. When they're responding to gravity, it's called gravitropism. And this is a really cool one too, this thigmotropism, which is where all the, so when you see poison ivy growing up around trees, or sweet peas that can climb up a wall, or creeping, what do they call it? All the creeping type plants or peas and that sort of stuff that can climb up walls, all because of thigmotropism. So we should have been able to get all the way through your vocabulary. There are 40 words in there. I hope that helps explain some of the things that we've been going over the last couple of weeks. Please feel free to go back into those CK12 assignments and go back over and review those, because I think that it's important, and you'll need that background, particularly when we're talking about angiosperms and the actual parts of the flower. Those are going to be really, really important when we start talking about corn plants specifically, and how they're fertilized and how we can create new varieties and that sort of thing. All that stuff is going to be important as we move forward. So please feel free to email me if you have any questions. There is not an assignment for today. I just wanted you to go through all that vocabulary. And now that you have that copy of that, you can go through and just take a look and make sure that you're good there. So hoping to see everybody at our FFA meeting tonight at 7 o'clock in the Middle School Commons. If not, we will plan to touch base with you again next week on Tuesday. Enjoy your long weekend. We'll talk to you soon.